although they made the most successful racing engine in Formula One history, the thing that put them on the lexicon of the international community was not racing. It was one word, 2 syllables. Whale tail. It's Cosworth. Back in the 1950s, 2 Lotus employees, named Mike Costin and Keith Duckworth, were thinking together, and they thought, what if we build our own engines instead of building Lotus engines? But in order to sell engines, you need to have a company. So, since it was Mike Costin and Keith Duckworth, they thought, Cosworth. And Cosworth immediately began making lightweight engines for Lotus. But they wanted some more money, and they wanted to branch out, so they started making Formula 2 engines. And that got them a good chunk of change and got them some recognition. So by the time they wanted to enter Formula 1, they had some friends in high places, specifically Colin Chapman. Ever heard of him? And they called up Colin Chapman and said, hey, we need your help. So Colin Chapman called up Ford, and Ford was like, yeah, we'll give you some engines, we'll give you some money. So Ford gave them £100,000 in 1960s money, and a bunch of engines, and said, go build us an F1 engine. So, they made the DFV, widely regarded as one of the greatest engines ever made. And it is a masterpiece. This lightweight V8 made 410 horsepower, and it had many benefits besides its lightweight and high power output because it was bolted on the chassis. It was a physical, structural component of the car, which means you could save weight from having a second chassis for the engine or components. And it made the chassis stronger and more rigid to make those faster on the corners. And during its debut year for the Lotus 49, in 1968, it won the Dutch Grand Prix with Jim Clark at the helm. And that was just the start, because from its entry in 1967 to its last race victory in 1983 at Detroit, it was used by over 55 Formula One teams. It won 155 races, 12 drivers' championships, and 10 manufacturer championships. No engine from Ferrari, McLaren, Mercedes have ever eclipsed that number. It was used by the smaller teams. Modified, updated versions were used up until 1991. Almost 30 years after its release. And the final version of the DFV made 510 horsepower at 11,000 RPM. And it wasn't even just Formula 1 that it was successful in. It won Le Mans outright twice with Mirage and Rondeau? I don't know. And then later on it achieved some more class championships. 5 of them, to be precise, in the monstrous Group C era. But during all of this, they didn't want to just make Formula 1 engines, because that's a very niche market, so they branched out. And once again, they partnered with Ford. In 1969, they made the BDA, but instead of a V8, this was a 4-cylinder, because they took the bland Escort 4-cylinder, improved those dual overhead cams, put in some 16 valves, and it was a masterpiece. The road version made 113 horsepower, and in racing trim, that was bumped up to 250. Now, what racing was this? None other than rally racing. WRC, baby. And the Ford Escort RS 1600 was rather good at that. In 1979, it won both the driver's and the manufacturer's title. That's not bad. And that engine was later updated into a turbocharged monster used by the Ford RS 200 Group B car. Only the maddest, most insane Ford ever devised. This rally car, designed for narrow rally stages, made anywhere from 550 to 800 horsepower based on boost pressure and fuel type. That's insane. 800 horsepower sounds terrifying on a rally stage. But they didn't want to just stay at Ford. But they did want to go to America. Because so far they've only been working in Europe. But they decided to branch out to the Indy 500. And they made an IndyCar version of the DFV called the DFX. Those guys are very original, I know. This 2.7-liter turbocharged engine won the Indy 500 10 times in a row. And it was the only engine that could actually put a stop to the Oppenheimer engine reign, which had won Indy 500 almost 20 times by then. And while they were in America in the 1970s, they got a call from a guy named John DeLorean. He worked at Chevy, and he had advertised that the Chevy Vega was going to be able to out-handle almost any European car and out-accelerate any car in its class. Now, the Vega sucked, and it couldn't do any of that. It was a pile of junk that nearly destroyed GM's reputation. However, by 1975, Cosworth was using a Chevy i4 in its racing series, and it was putting out 260 horsepower in a little thing called Project EA. No, not that one. Get your stupid money out of here. And he decided to call up Cosworth, and DeLorean was like, hey, you want to help improve the, Vega so it doesn't suck? And Cosworth agreed. And they put that four-banger into the Vega. However, the road prototype made 170 horsepower, which is immense for an American car in the 70s. But then the EPA got involved. And they put all sorts of restrictions for environmental protection's sake. And it was downgraded to 110 horsepower. Yeah. Now, that doesn't mean the engine wasn't impressive, because GM requires every engine they have to be able to run for 200 hours non-stop at maximum RPM for durability. Cosworth's i4 could rev to 9,400 RPM for 500 hours straight before braking. And with a rev cap at 7,000 RPM, it was a very reliable engine. And it was the fastest accelerating car in its class, faster than Lancias, Audis, and more. I don't know if that speaks to how bad 70s cars were, or how good the Cosworth was for its era, because I know it weighed just 2,500 pounds, but it still did 0 to 60 in 10.3 seconds. That's terrible. And yet somehow it was the best. Oh yeah, and they only made about 3,500 of them, so they're like actually somewhat expensive for a crappy 70s car. However, they had success in IndyCar for the time being until the 80s. And Cosworth wanted to do something in the 80s because they were a bit bored of Formula 1, they were a bit bored of IndyCar. And then Ford came knocking on their door yet again. Because just like Chevy with the Vega, Ford released the Sierra, a very good car, However, its style was perhaps a bit too radical, and people weren't buying it. They needed a fast version. So, Cosworth made them a fast version. They found a turbocharger the size of a trash can. They put a limited slip differential, better suspension, an extra set of fuel injectors, a larger intercooler, and most importantly of all, fully functioning rear wing, aka the whale tail, the most iconic rear wing of them all. And in 1987 they released the 227 horsepower Sierra RS 500 Cosworth. One of the greatest cars Ford has ever made. It had a top speed of 150 miles an hour. And that engine was legendary. And what did Ford do with this car? They went motor racing. Those extra injections, that's not English, those extra injectors, and a bigger turbo was fitted meant it made 550 horsepower. And it raced in touring cars from 1987 to 1990, and it was rather successful at it. It won DTM, AMSCAR, Nissan Mobile, Australian, Japanese, New Zealand, and British touring car championships, just to name a few. And then it won the Spa 24 Hours, it won the Wellington 500, the Sandown 500, the Fuji 500, the Bathurst 1000, and the RAC Tourist Trophy. It's one of the most successful touring cars of all time. It was an unstoppable force, winning 84% of the races it competed in. 84%! And so what we had here, even for the road version, was a $20,000 car with the performance of a $100,000 car, and the locks of a $2 shed. Meaning, they were stolen about every 5 minutes, taken on joyrides, and then crashed. It was so expensive to insure one, it was actually, the premiums were more expensive than the price of the car. And on that relatively disappointing end to the Cosworth Sierra, they went to another touring car, Mercedes. Mercedes had the 190E, one of the most boring car names of all time, but the car itself was already pretty good, because they were developing it for Group B Rally, and then Audi came on the scene. And they said, no thanks, we're not going to bother with that all-wheel drive because we can't match that, so they went touring car racing with it instead. And the WA engine, I'm not kidding, that's the actual WAA Cosworth engine, the WA Cosworth engine, made 320 horsepower, and in 1991 and 1992 it won the DTM Dutch Touring Car Masters Championship. That's pretty darn good, because it was facing the BMW M3 and the Sierra Cosworth. That's some pretty stiff competition. And that's not the only Germans they got involved with. Audi came knocking on their door in 1999 with a wagon that needed some help. The all-wheel drive RS4 was tuned up to make 375 horsepower from a 2.7-liter turbo V6 by Cosworth. And it did 0 to 60 in 4.9 seconds and a quarter mile in 11.3 seconds for a wagon before the turn of the century. That's impressive. It was so impressive that Audi bought a majority stake in Cosworth and used it to develop the new RS6 with a 450 horsepower twin-turbo V8. Now, just because Audi owned them doesn't mean they didn't work for other companies. Because Ford, surprise surprise, came knocking on their door yet again. This time was another design failure gone wrong. The Scorpio. One of the worst cars in Ford's recent history in 1998. And in fact, it was in dire straits. They were about to end production, so they called on Cosworth to tune that little V6 And in 1998, these Scorpio Cosworth made 206 horsepower in a sedan, and it did 0 to 60 in 8.2 seconds and a top speed of 140 miles an hour. And did it save it like the Sierra? No. No. The Scorpio was just too far gone and too hideous, and even Cosworth's very impressive engine couldn't save them. But it did bring Cosworth back to the American side with IndyCar. They became the leading engine supplier for a number of years with a Chevy partnership, making 800 horsepower from a V8. Now that partnership eventually folded in 2008. Luckily, they had another project they could work on. You see, out of all of the companies and all of the land and all of the world, Subaru is the least you would expect from Cosworth. But they did it anyway. In 2010, the WRX Cosworth CF400 was a flat four, making 400 horsepower, 400 torque, and that all-wheel drive system Subaru is known for, 0 to 60 in 3.7 seconds. And, oh yeah, only 75 of them were ever made, so they went very quickly sold out. And that's not the only Japanese brand that got involved. In 2013 saw the release of the new Toyota GT86 sports car, and people went, that's a great car, but it's a bit underpowered, less than 200 horsepower, come on guys. And Cosworth agreed with that. So, they made it more powerful. They threw in a big old supercharger, bumped it up to 280 horsepower, without Toyota's permission. They did this at an aftermarket kit because they were so determined to make that car more powerful. And it did 0 to 60 under 5 seconds, and the original was already pretty slidey. And the Cosworth was even more slidey. And then just a year later, they got into the tech industry with the PDR, Performance Data Recorder, which is a built-in system that records your lap time, G-forces, analytics, to show you what you've done on your lap and how you can improve. And this program was implemented in the Corvette Z06 for the first time in 2014. So what's next for Cosworth? Well, this year they got a few projects going on. First of them being TVR back to Europe with the Griffith. They took a Ford Mustang engine, tuned it up from 425 horsepower to 500 horsepower in a car weighing less than 2,800 pounds, and it's a car designed by Gordon Murray, so TVR plus Gordon Murray plus Cosworth is a pretty darn good team-up. And then they teamed up with Aston Martin, who also teamed up with Red Bull. That's the only other partnership better than Gordon Murray, TVR, and Cosworth, is Aston Martin, Red Bull Formula 1, and Cosworth. Now that's a team-up. They made the Aston Martin Valkyrie. Cosworth built a 6.5-liter V12 with a hybrid system, revving to 11,200 RPM, and makes 1,130 brake horsepower without a turbocharger in sight. It's the most powerful naturally aspirated car in history of a production road car. It did 0 to 60 in 2.5 seconds, and the road car pulls 2.5 G, but Aston Martin and Cosworth wanted more, so they made the AMR Valkyrie with even more power that was undisclosed, and it pulls 3.3 G in racing spec. 3.3. Many tuning companies tend to stay with their original partners. Mercedes-AMG, or Lincoln-Felter Chevrolet. But no tuning company has ever done such a wide range of manufacturers. Just point to any continent on the globe, and Cosworth has probably tuned a car there. And who knows, maybe they'll get back into Formula 1. It seems unlikely with the current crappy state that Formula 1 is, but you never know. And Cosworth continues to make bonkers, insane, mentalist racing cars. 50 years. after their founding.